Good morning, everybody. My name is Rafe Sonnenschein. I'm the Executive Director of the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs at Cal State LA, welcoming you to this webinar honoring Secretary of State of California, Alex Padilla. Before we begin, a little housekeeping. First, the entire webinar will be recorded, so you will have a chance, if you miss any portion of it, to hear it at a later time. In addition, the chat function will be working. We hope you'll take advantage of it and give us some comments and thoughts. Some of them may find their way into our conversation as well. I'm really very pleased to be able to thank all of our program supporters who make this event and our other events possible. And I'd like to read the whole list to you. Edison International, the California Community Foundation, the Coca-Cola Foundation, the California Latino Legislative Caucus Foundation, SEIU Local 721, Supervisor Hilda Solis, Wells Fargo Foundation, Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas, the Weingart Foundation, Southern California Gas Company, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, State Farm, IBEW Local 47, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Churla Action Fund, Charlie Wu, Reyes Coca-Cola Bottling, and ABC7. And now I'd like to introduce the president of Cal State LA, Dr. William Covino. President Covino joined Cal State LA in 2013 and since then has led the direction of Cal State LA to be a truly community-centered university and has gained national recognition as a center of service, engagement, and the public good. And he's been a great supporter of the Pat Brown Institute, and it is indeed a great pleasure to introduce him and have him to welcome you formally.
Good morning. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us for a conversation with our distinguished honoree, our California Secretary of State, Alex Padilla. Welcome, Alex. Congratulations. Thank you for all of the work that you have done for years and years on behalf of Californians. Now, normally, some of you know that normally in the spring, the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs holds a gala to recognize and honor outstanding individuals. We all know that this spring was like no other. COVID-19 has reshaped the world. We see this in the mundane aspects of our everyday lives. We see it in the long list of canceled events or modified events or Zoom events. And we see it in the tragic tally of those who are ill or who have died. The need for the work of the Pat Brown Institute has not lessened since the pandemic started. In fact, it's grown deeper. In response to these surreal circumstances, PBI pivoted. Rafe and his team reshaped and moved events like this one online. And the Pat Brown Institute has continued to do the research, outreach, training, and collaboration that's given it such a distinguished voice and such a respected presence since the organization was founded. So whether face-to-face or in a virtual space, Cal State LA has a deep and transformative impact on our region. Our long list of outward-facing initiatives, partnerships, and collaborative efforts, including so many that are headed by PBI, have earned us this important distinction. We need PBI's voice and presence and critical conversations such as this one. We need them now more than ever. So once again, congratulations to Rafe and PBI for another year of unleashing the power of participation. Congratulations again to our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, for receiving and deserving so well the 2020 Pat Brown Legacy Award. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Covino. Very briefly, just so you all know, in 1987, former Governor Pat Brown brought his institute, the Pat Brown Institute, to Cal State LA, a public university in the heart of Los Angeles, making a statement about upward mobility and the future of the young people of California. And now that Cal State LA is the #1 university in the country for the upward mobility of students, I always believe Pat Brown would be very proud that he made that decision. As the president says, we may be operating remotely, but we're anything but remote. We are still doing many of our signature programs, Civic U, Civic High, and the Civic Quiz, which some of you received yesterday, which I'm hoping Alex Padilla did very well on since the theme was voting. We're hoping he got 100% on it. That program will start up again after October. Our debate program, our research program, polling of racial and ethnic communities, the census program we're doing, and in some cases working with Alex Padilla, and our Southeast LA initiative, working with California Community Foundation, Weingart Foundation, the Balmer Group, and others to uplift the communities of Southeast LA. We're very excited that we're still able to make a contribution and want to continue as we go. Right now, I would like to introduce Dr. Jose Gomez, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Cal State LA, a critical factor working with President Covino on the community efforts and engagement for the community, including the Biosciences Initiative, having the LA Football Club practice facility at our university, and raising philanthropic support for the community, and is the chair of the Board of Advisors of the Pat Brown Institute. And in that role, we've asked Dr. Gomez to present this distinguished award to Alex Padilla. So let me turn it over to Dr. Gomez.
Thank you, Rafe, and thank you, President Covino. You mentioned that Cal State LA is #1 in the nation for the upward mobility of our students. And there's probably no better symbol of the power of opportunity than our honoree today. I am pleased to present the 2020 Governor Pat Brown Legacy Award to California Secretary of State Alex Padilla. This award honors California leaders who share the late Governor Pat Brown's vision of a great, diverse, and innovative state that cares about impactful public policy and inclusion and justice for all. Presenting this award to Secretary of State Padilla is a special treat for me. I first met Alex over 20 years ago. We were both working on the 1998 coordinated campaign for the state Democratic Party. We had offices next to each other, and it was there that I learned that he was a kind, smart, compassionate, and energetic leader. The following year, less than a year later, at the age of 26, this son of Mexican immigrants from Pacoima, who attended local public schools and then graduated from MIT, was elected to the Los Angeles City Council. Shortly thereafter, he was elected council president, the youngest ever and the first Latino to serve in that capacity. He then went on to serve in the state Senate for 8 years, and in 2014, he was elected California's Secretary of State. We honor Secretary of State Padilla this morning for showing us what young people can do in government, for being a friend of a clean and healthy California, a legislative pioneer who pursued ambitious policies to combat climate change and create a greener and more sustainable economy. He authored the law that made California the first state in the nation to require chain restaurants to post calorie information directly on the menus and menu boards of restaurants. Menu labeling was later included in the Affordable Care Act and is now national policy. He also wrote California's first smoke-free housing law and fought to increase enforcement and penalties for the illegal sale of tobacco to minors. He also established a sustainable funding source for pediatric trauma care throughout the state, and also looked out for the interests of our state's 1.5 million English learners through landmark legislation. We also recognize Secretary of State Padilla for being a champion for higher education in California and especially for the California State University system. He authored a historic law that now ensures that community college students have a strong and clear pathway to the CSU. Because of this important legislation, Cal State LA is now leading the way in welcoming community college students to the university through the Associate Degree for Transfer program. Finally, this morning we honor Secretary of State Padilla for putting California at the national forefront of fair and safe elections. By modernizing the Secretary of State's office, expanding voter registration levels to all-time highs, undertaking the massive effort to give all Californians the opportunity to participate in the 2020 election in this time of crisis, and leading secretaries of state from both parties in all the states from throughout the nation to work together. And with all that, he's also leading the state's extraordinary effort to count every California resident for the US Census. His work is definitely unleashing the power of participation. Thank you, Alex, for your unwavering commitment to California, for what you've done, and for what you will do. Dr. Rafe Sonnenschein will now present you with the 2020 Governor Pat Brown Legacy Award. Rafe?
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. In a very 2020 way, we're presenting you this award done by sculptor Alex Shagan, who's been doing this for more than 20 years for the Pat Brown Institute. And this is a very important award that many distinguished California leaders have received. Last year's award winner was Kathleen Brown, the governor's daughter, former state treasurer, candidate for governor, and a leader in California. And it is well-deserved, Alex, and we're very proud to be able to virtually present this to you. Someday, you will actually have it in your hands.
Well, thank you, Rafe. It's an honor to virtually receive the award. It means a lot coming from you. You know, we were catching up just recently on just how far back our paths have been intertwined. Of course, it's good to see Jose. We were reminiscing earlier about our much younger days. We're still young, but much younger days as we were cutting our way into politics and government in California. And of course, President Covino, thank you for all your support of the Institute and your tremendous leadership at Cal State LA and all the students that you're serving and continue to serve at this time. It means a lot to me, folks. This is a big deal. Enjoy public service tremendously, been at it for a few years. Just affirmation that we're doing some good things along the way to help people. That's what it's about. We have a pretty good turnout. I see there's well more than 100, working our way to 150 people logged in digitally. And so, you know, my 7.5 years on the city council was able to present a lot of certificates and resolutions to people for special occasions and accomplishments. Same thing, my 8 years in the state senate. And so when I was elected Secretary of State, I thought, well, you know, one of my the aspects of the job that is often overlooked is the Secretary of State of California is also the custodian of the state's archives. So from time to time, we get to dip into the archives and not give away originals, but make some high resolution copies or images of some of our historical collection and share it in what I think are some pretty special moments. And so in honor of receiving this award from the Pat Brown Institute, we dug up a few items from Pat Brown himself, including this picture. And now you can show it, Rafe. So I'm presenting this back to Rafe and the Institute. It's an image of former Governor Pat Brown over the aqueduct. This was not when he cut the ribbon. This was years later, well, long after he was governor. But this one spoke to me. Number one, you know, the aqueduct and infrastructure in general being such a big part of his legacy. As an engineer, we know how important infrastructure is for a growing population and an aging state. But third, we see a lot of official images and some stoic images of Pat Brown. This one, not so much. He had a little personality and character shining through as he struck a pose for the LA Times. So it's part of our collection now at the State Archives, and I wanted to share this copy with you, Rafe. And when the time comes, maybe there's a space in the office for it for other people to enjoy.
Thank you very much, Alex. I know that our staff and the Brown family will really appreciate this, and I'll make sure that everybody sees this. And you're right, it's a very cool pose he's casting there. So it's a little bit different than a lot of the pictures we've seen. And as one of our board members, Sarah Pillsbury, points out, he's looking very happy and optimistic, which is really very true of Pat Brown. So thank you, Alex.
We didn't have to balance budgets at that point of his life.
There you go. So it's the rest of our time is a wonderful opportunity for us to just chat, Alex. And as you and I have discussed, we think of these webinars as you and I are hanging out at a coffee shop. We could decide it's a bar if you'd like, but I think the coffee shops are going to open long before the bars do. And our audience has sort of dropped by and is listening in on our conversation. And we want to go back and forth from the personal to the professional, but right off the bat, we're going to have to talk about this engineer thing at some point. We'll come back to that, but tell me a little bit about growing up in Pacoima, what it was like. What was your neighborhood like? What were your friends like? What was life like being a kid there before you headed off to the dreaded East Coast for college?
It was, I know, in hindsight, it was a whole mix of things. As many of our friends here know, I'm a proud son of immigrant parents, right? Like so many others throughout Los Angeles and throughout California, and frankly, throughout the country. My parents immigrated here from Mexico separately. My dad is from Jalisco. My mom was from Chihuahua. They actually met in Los Angeles, both having given themselves about a year to figure out a work situation. And in that year, they found each other, fell in love, so begins the movie. But they applied for green cards, and I thank the U.S. government every day for saying yes. Otherwise, my life story would be a lot different, right? We can reflect on that. Mm-hmm. But they became legal permanent residents, settled into the San Fernando Valley, started a family. Growing up in Pacoima, really, look, it was in the 1980s is really sort of my junior high school years. As I go around the state speaking, especially to young people now, I ask them, have you seen the movie La Bamba? Right? If you know the Richie Valens story, then you know Pacoima. That is the same town that I am from. He went to San Fernando High School. I graduated from San Fernando High School. But the times I was growing up in were very different than Richie. So I'll refer people to maybe Straight Outta Compton and what the greater Los Angeles area was like in the mid to late 80s from, drug dealing, gang activity, some of the violence surrounding that. We were no strangers to that, saw that literally right in front of our home. It's part of what motivated my parents to create a neighborhood watch group. It wasn't called that, but in essence, that's what it was. The community started looking out for each other. So it was a modest home, strong family values. My parents, like most immigrants, right, emphasizing education, and public service. My father worked as a cook. My mom cleaned houses, so modest income, to put it mildly. But we always were told by my mom that no matter how tough we had it and how much of a struggle it might have been at times to make ends meet, there was other people who were suffering much more than we were. And so it was our duty, our obligation to help others. And so tons of examples of that from my parents growing up, volunteerism, etc. And so that's what it was like. And knowing that graduating high school was not a goal, it was expected. Going on to college was not a dream, it was expected. I leveraged, my favorite subject, which was math, with the other subject I happened to do well in, which was science. And the teachers and counselors said, engineering, young man, engineering. And so in addition to applying to some UCs and CSUs, there was that dream school long shot application to MIT.
Where you got in.
Where we got in.
And so you had to go 3,000 miles away to a part of the country you were not familiar with, right? To a very different place. How was that, getting to MIT? What was it like?
And I'd be lying if I didn't say it wasn't scary. I had never been east of El Paso, and we only went that far east because we were on the way to visit family in Chihuahua. And so the thought of transplanting 3,000 miles cross country was a little overwhelming, but this was years before www.anything. So even asking for the application required a phone call or sending a letter. Imagine that.
Wow.
Between that initial request and the application and eventually the acceptance letter, a lot of brochures, a lot of flyers, a lot of mailers. And I realized that if I had a chance, if I got in, if I was accepted, I had to go. Not just because it was a chance of a lifetime for me, but talk about the fulfillment of my parents' dreams, right? Their struggles, their sacrifice. They moved 3,000 miles permanently, from their friends and family in search of a better life. So how could I let a little bit of fear get in the way of me being able to pursue a higher education at one of the finest universities in America? So there I went, packed all my worldly possessions into 2 tote bags, showed up in Cambridge, Massachusetts 2 days before classes started. It was an adventure for 4 years, not easy by any stretch, but absolutely worth it. Came home for cold winters later with a mechanical engineering degree, and would do it over again, even knowing that I didn't stay in engineering strictly. I'd do it over again. It was a great experience.
Well, thank you. Well, something changed, Alex. I mean, you were on a path to be a mechanical engineer. You had a job at Used Aircraft when you got back. It was 1994. So what redirected your path to the Alex Padilla, who's now been in public service essentially ever since? What was the situation? What changed your direction?
So a few things. So I did graduate from MIT in 1994. And took one of the best trips I've ever taken. My best friend and I rented a car in Cambridge, Massachusetts the day after our graduation, and we drove back to Pacoima. Took about 8 days making that cross-country trip. Learned a lot about the country and ourselves along the way. But when we came home in 1994, I'll take us back to what California was like a little bit more than 25 years ago. First of all, we were undergoing a significant economic recession. Post-Northridge earthquake, real estate market being what it was, and for a young engineer working in aerospace, post-Cold War, Defense Department cutbacks, the aerospace sector was contracting, right? So it was layoffs, not startups. So that in and of itself was forcing a what else is out there process for me. But at the same time, never really thinking I was interested in politics and government per se. Proposition 187 was on the ballot that fall. And so it wasn't just the audacity and defensiveness of Proposition 187, right? Immigrant bashing, scapegoating, as a proud son of immigrants, a Latino growing up in Southern California, but as I've come to diagnose myself a little bit in hindsight, think about the moment for me. After 4 years of working hard to get through MIT, one of the best universities in the nation, as a tribute to my parents who have worked hard. My dad is a short order cook, my mom cleaning houses, their immigrant story and journey, coming home to a message that, the economy is bad because of people like your parents and people like your family. It was offensive. At that time, I think that the voice of my high school government teacher, Mr. Alex Ressa, who may be listening and watching here, rang true, right? We live in a democracy. I was born here, a citizen eligible to register and vote. But I also knew that if we didn't engage beyond that our community could continue to be a target. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that whether it's Ricardo Lara, now our insurance commissioner, or Kevin De Leon coming into the city council, or so many others of our generation might not have been initially inclined to get involved in politics, but realized we had no choice if we wanted to speak up, stand up, and make things better, right those wrongs. I'll also make note that my parents had been here nearly 30 years at that point with no urgency in becoming citizens. Well, that all changed after Proposition 187 passed, and the hundreds of thousands of people like them, between their generation naturalizing, registering to vote, never missing an election, and the younger generation of young people really knowing that we needed to commit to get active, not just to organize at the community level, but to run for office and seek other positions of political leadership. It's a long, big reason why California is today considered the land of the resistance in this political climate.
Alex, let me take you fast forward past all the steps that you took to get to where you are now. I want to talk to you about the census and in voting. Given what you just said about Prop 187, did something go down your spine in the nature of a chill when you saw the president the other day say that undocumented residents in effect should not be counted as inhabitants are listed in the Constitution when the census data is used next year to draw a district line? Did that bring back connections to Prop 187 in 1994?
Hugely. It's first of all, outright offensive. We learned enough at this stage to know that it's also unconstitutional and unlawful what he's calling for. And sadly, it's just the attack du jour of Trump against the immigrant community, not just the Latino community, but the immigrant community more broadly. No, it's just the latest, whatever you want to call it, a hurdle we have to jump over ever since he first came down the escalator to announce his campaign for president, right? Attacking Latinos, rapists and drug dealers, etc. It's been nonstop attacks from this individual, both as a candidate and in the Oval Office for the last 4 years. So we're going to continue to push back. We're going to continue to correct the record, whether it's the census that he's attacking or faith in our elections, which I know we're going to talk about, that he's attacking. At the end of the day, he knows that there's a lot of political power in communities of color and immigrant communities and this next generation when we participate and when we are counted, whether it's in the census or at the ballot box. That's why he works so hard to try to keep us from being counted, whether it's in elections or through the census. So like with so many things in my life, turning a challenge and an obstacle into motivation and an opportunity. So we'll continue to do the work, both on the census side and on the election side.
So Alex, I sometimes have this, California's put a tremendous amount of money into the census to make sure it's done. And at the same time, it's like the train is being attacked with decisions and shocks and whether to put a citizenship question on. The latest thing is to stop the door-to-door work a month early. I presume that came as a shock to you to hear that the president is talking about blocking the completion of the census well before October 31st. Is there anything that can be done about that?
Yeah, well, look, first, let me be honest. It was a little bit of a surprise, but not a shock. I mean, nothing shocks us with this president anymore. So, just for everybody else's edification who may not be aware, Census Day was April, but the process itself started prior to then, and it was in the July timeframe that was the deadline for the self-response period. We know why the census is important. It determines federal funding. It drives representation in Congress for each state, and also the reapportionment and redistricting process. So there's a ton at stake in the census. But given the impact of COVID-19 starting in early March, at least the Bureau was smart enough to, and I'm glad somebody posted the 2020 census.gov website in the chat room for more information, to delay and extend some of that activity, right? Hard for the Census Bureau and a lot of community-based organizations to do the outreach and assistance, especially in hard-to-count communities during stay-at-home orders and this global health pandemic. So the good news was, the field activity wasn't canceled, it was delayed, and it's recently started up again. The deadline for self-response was extended into October, end of October. And so we knew that it was challenging enough. Census itself is challenging enough every 10 years, but during a pandemic, even tougher. But they were making some accommodations for the required activity. And then lo and behold, two things. The directive that, that field activity is going to be halted early, and the county is going to stop, and the deadline for responding is going to be accelerated by a month. And so nothing but a very blatant attempt to undercount, not just more across the country, but specifically the hard to count communities that take that more time, take that additional effort of field activity to be counted. So where we are right now when it comes to California and the census is mixed news. We're just shy of 65% of households having responded already to the census. We're about a percentage point ahead of the national average. So that's not bad news, that's good news, but we're still a far cry of where we were 10 years ago. And 65% of households being counted means 35% have not. That's a lot of households, a lot of people, a lot of federal funding at stake, congressional seats at stake that could be taken away, legal battles now underway to fight against Trump's wishes of not counting immigrants and undocumented immigrants, because the devastating impact that would have on California's congressional representation, funding for critical services, and more. So the fight is on, and we're just taking every opportunity we can to remind every friend, every neighbor, every coworker that if they haven't done the census already, they have to do it right away.
So Alex, you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. You've got the census crisis and the voting crisis, and they're both kind of in your lap. So that's okay. We'll just make you take care of this for all of us. Actually, we're going to ask you at the end how we can help so that you're not kind of on your own. Let's talk about voting. All the talk is about vote by mail. And I know that you're going to be sending ballots to every voter in California. I presume someone's going to file lawsuits, and maybe they have already because it's happening around the country, saying you can't send absentee ballots because it's a flawed system rife with fraud. What's happening with that, and what's happening on the legal front, and what are you hearing here and around the country from your fellow secretaries of state about this?
Sure. Well, let's start with California first, and happy to talk with what my conversations and relationships are with secretaries across the country on both sides of the aisle, I will say. Look, in California, let's flash back to the primary, because we had moved our primary up from June to March, which in hindsight was brilliant. Normally California's presidential primaries in June, usually who the nominees are have been pretty well established before we get to go vote. So we wanted to be more relevant in the presidential nomination process, and we were part of March 3rd Super Tuesday. So we had the primary behind us when the really big impact of COVID started hitting, right? It was about March 13th or so when emergencies were being declared, stay-at-home orders issued soon thereafter, all those sorts of things. So we pretty quickly turned from the primary to looking ahead to November and asking ourselves the question, how do we administer the election in November in a way that continues to be as accessible as possible, as securely as possible, but now also as safe as possible because of the COVID-19 pandemic? We didn't want to just think, we knew it all, so we convened legislative representatives, the governor's office, of course, county elections administrators, voting rights advocates, and others to think through how we should approach November. And it turned out that a lot of the policies that we put in place in recent years to maximize access to the ballot make even more sense during the pandemic, right? So it's starting with registration. There's no safer, physically distancing safe way to register to vote or to update your registration than to do it online. And so we want to continue to promote that. We're continuing to see the benefits of automatic registration through DMV as people apply for and renew their driver's licenses and their state IDs. By the way, I think somebody put into the chat box, if not they should, vote.ca.gov. All the elections, tools, and resources you're going to need or ask about can be found at one centralized location, vote.ca.gov. But registration is just half the battle. We've made tremendous progress. There's now more than 20.7, maybe 20.8 million voters on the rolls in California. And more by the day going towards November. But how we actually vote, same thing. California is no stranger to vote by mail. In the primary, more than 70% of voters received a mail-in ballot. And so we want to build on that by affording everybody an opportunity to vote by mail as their first choice. And so first via executive order, then follow-up legislation, we took the steps to direct counties to mail every registered voter a ballot in the mail in advance of the election. But of course, we have to educate and make sure the awareness is there for people to anticipate that ballot in the mail. Remember to sign the envelope when they're done and get it in on time. It's got to be postmarked on or before election day, all those sorts of things. But look, California is a large and diverse state, and you have a lot of people who need to vote in person. And so we're simultaneously working hard to provide, in partnership with counties, as many safe in-person opportunities to vote both on and before election day for people who need assistance, whether it's accessibility concerns, language assistance, same-day registration has to be done in person, or even replacement ballots. If you lost it, made a mistake, need a replacement ballot. We don't want to have people lose their right to vote for going to an all vote by mail only system. So you're going to hear both from us: vote by mail, vote by mail, vote by mail. Or if you need to vote in person, it's going to be a different voting experience. Think masks and hand sanitizers, all the PPE and physical distancing measures are going to be in place. But the more people who can vote early, whether it's by mail or in person, should translate into shorter lines, smaller crowds, and a safer space for voters and election workers on election day.
So, Alex, oddly
Now,
enough,
if we can get the other states to do the same.
well, there you go. Oddly enough, President Trump seems to believe that vote by mail is bad for Republicans, but there's plenty of evidence that vote by mail could be bad for Democrats. In the 25th congressional district race in March, there was a big turnout of Republican voters and also white voters generally by the vote by mail, and a very low turnout among Latino voters and young voters. And there seems to be lots of evidence that a lot of communities, working class communities, communities of color, young people, are not used to voting by mail, are used to having a voting place to go to. And you've got a couple of months to kind of reorient that. By the way, a lot of Republicans are complaining that the president is being so down on vote by mail, which is has historically helped Republicans more than Democrats. How are you going to really get people who are used to voting in polling places to just vote by mail and be done with it?
Well, first, let me say, vote by mail and us promoting vote by mail is not about Democrat or Republican.
Mm-hmm.
It's about voting rights and public health, right? That's what it's
Right.
about, and that's what it needs to stay about. And so it is not just not helpful, it's frankly hurtful every time Trump continues to attack vote by mail and our elections more broadly. First of all, it's baseless. There's no evidence to his claims of massive voter fraud. Vote by mail has been successful, secure, and convenient for voters for decades, not just in California, in red states and blue states and purple states across the country. It's also being hypocritical, right? Because he himself and many of his key staff members and advisors vote by mail. So he wants it for himself. He's just making it harder for others to do it. And he's been blunt, right? I'm not speculating. This is not political commentary. He himself and other Republican leaders have suggested that the more people who can vote, the tougher his chances at the ballot in November is going to be. So it's his political agenda that we're seeing. But every time he does that, number one, I have to correct the record. And number two, it makes my job just a little bit harder in explaining to people why they should have confidence in vote by mail, because they deserve to have that confidence in vote by mail. Yes, it's convenient, but it's also secure, right? We have a number of security measures to prevent against the fraud that he claims, including signature verification. That's why we require a signature on the back of the envelope. And we're also building more transparency into vote by mail this year. Again, at vote.ca.gov, you'll find an option of where's my ballot. It's a ballot tracking program that we're expanding statewide now, where you can sign up to receive email alerts, text message alerts, or even automated phone calls on the status of your ballot through the postal delivery process. So you know when to anticipate it at home, but also when it's on its way back to the county. And imagine, Rafe, getting a notification that your ballot was received and counted, right? Great for transparency, great for accountability, and great for confidence in the vote by mail process.
So I'm trying to decide what to do when my absentee ballot comes, when my vote by mail ballot comes, which I guess will be pretty soon, early October, right?
Right.
With everybody saying the post office is having trouble, how are they going to handle all this? Should I just take it and go to a polling place and drop it off the minute it arrives once I make up my mind and vote? I mean, does it pay to vote early this year, as early as you possibly can?
Well, the great thing is that in California, you as a voter have options, right? So the easiest way is return it through the Postal Service, and you don't need stamps. Return postage is prepaid. You'll also have the option of delivering your ballot to any secure drop box in the county, right? Counties are installing ballot drop boxes weeks ahead of the election. So think a regular mailbox, but marked clearly for ballots only. And you can drop it off to anyone that's convenient to you in those weeks leading up to the election, or you can drop it off in any vote center or polling place convenient to you. The choice is yours. And with, again, the ballot tracking mechanism, you'll get that notification when it was indeed received and counted by the county. But to your earlier question about vote by mail versus people who aren't as comfortable or used to vote by mail, that's all the more reason why we're doing it the California way. Unlike Oregon and Washington, in California, it's not a vote by mail or a vote in person, it is both. And so we know there's tremendous need for the in-person voting option. So we're setting up as many locations as we can. I'll get to the call to action later when it comes to poll workers. But it's not just going to be on election day only. Most counties are offering at least 4 days of voting, 3 days of early voting plus election day. Some counties offering even more days on top of that to give voters the ultimate flexibility of when, where, and how to cast their ballot. But despite COVID-19, there's some real concern, real health risk out there. I still think attention and energy around voting this November is high, and we're expecting and preparing for a very high turnout.
How many ballots are going out?
How many ballots are going out? Well, again, we're going to send a vote by mail ballot to every registered voter no later than 29 days before the election. So voter registration today is 20.8-ish voters on the rolls. It's going to continue to grow. So will it be 20.9? Will it be 21 million? We will see. But that's how many ballots will go out. And we can have all these options, whether it's by mail or in person. They're not as helpful if people aren't aware of them. So we're going to invest significantly and engage all of our partners in helping inform the public and educate voters about these options.
Can the post office handle 20 million ballots going out with the pressure they're under right now, both financially and politically, to cut back on service heading into these elections? What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, look, I get where the question is coming from because I read the same headlines too. The Postal Service as an agency, as a federal agency, is under the gun, both from a resource standpoint as well as a leadership standpoint. Again, we're not trying to be too partisan here, but the facts are the facts. Trump appoints one of his top fundraisers as Postmaster General, and within weeks, they're documenting growing backlogs and delays in service delivery. That is a concern, especially as we're going to be increasingly reliant on the Postal Service for vote by mail. So here's what we've done in California. Again, we have a lot of experience with vote by mail and great relationships with regional and local leaders of the Postal Service. So we started long ago with regular convenings by phone, in person once upon a time, now by Zoom occasionally, not just with our office, but with each and every county elections office to ongoing troubleshoot. It's all the more reason why the ballot tracking system is going to be so critical, because we'll be able to detect artificial delays or any significant delays in real time. So I do believe that in California anyway, that the Postal Service professionals are ready. And I have confidence in Speaker Pelosi to make sure that Congress holds the line on providing the Postal Service the resources they need to be able to do the job effectively through the November election.
So is the rule that you have to have your ballot postmarked before Election Day, even if it arrives after Election Day in California, but other states are saying your ballot has to be received before Election Day or not be counted? Is that correct? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We talked about the Constitution and what it says about the decennial census. In the same Constitution, it delegates election authority to the states. That's why each state is a little bit different in terms of how it administers elections. But for a few important federal laws that govern elections, like voting rights. But in some states, they say they have vote by mail, but it's not really of any significance. It's not easy to benefit from. In other states, it's more inclusive, and then you have some states that are universal, vote by mail. So in California, the policy is this. State law says your vote by mail ballot must be postmarked on or before election day and arrive within 3 days of the election, right? So even if it's not in hand yet when the polls close on election night, it'll still be counted in California. We're actually extending that deadline for purposes of this November in anticipation of possible Postal Service delays. So as long as that postmark is on there, we'll give it a couple of weeks to still arrive and be processed and added to the tally. We don't want to see anybody lose their voting rights through no fault of their own.
I'm voting early.
Vote early. I don't think
I'm voting the first hour that my ballot comes. I'm going to get it in. I want to miss the rush, as they used to say about sales at department stores.
Well, and I think we're living in a time where most people have decided by now who they're going to vote for, at least at the top of the ticket. You're not going to see the dynamic that we saw in the primary, where within a couple of days of the election, candidates were dropping out, endorsing somebody else, that sort of thing. That's not happening this November. Certainly not in the presidential contest. So yes, we encourage people to vote early, if at all possible. Elections offices in every county are going to be ready to start receiving ballots early, processing, not counting and announcing any results until after the polls close on election night. But the more they can prepare in advance, hopefully the less time they need on the back end to finish the ballot counting and auditing process.
Alex, near the end of our conversation now, and you were interviewed by the New York Times about a critical question, which is, what are the TV networks going to do on election night? They have spent 50 to 60 years perfecting calling races, calling states. We're going to stay up till 2 in the morning if we have to, maybe till the next morning if it's still close. Well, what on earth is going to happen if their temptation to call races, and even worse, to say 100% of the votes are in states and precincts when there are actually millions of ballots still out there? You had kind of a suggestion of how to think about this that was quoted. You might want to share that with us.
Right. So it was a column in the New York Times over the weekend, their media columnist, where I suggested, most news organizations are part of entertainment conglomerates, right? So, and maybe it's just Hollywood speak. I've encouraged them to think of election day not as a movie that has a beginning, a middle, and an end on election night, but maybe just the first part of a trilogy, because there's what's going to happen on election day, and in all likelihood, sort of what's going to happen in the day or days after the election, and then what's going to happen in the week or weeks following the election, but all for good reason, right? This is, and for as much work as we have to put into educating voters, we also have to educate the press and the reporters that we'll have a pretty good sense maybe in the outcome of most contests on election night, but for close races and for final numbers, it's going to be a couple of weeks because of things like vote by mail and the longer time it takes to process that, or policies in California like provisional ballots, right? There's some states that if you show up, your name's not on the list, you're out of luck. In California, we provide a provisional ballot option. It takes longer to manually process those provisional ballots, but we do that out of respect for voting rights in California. And for folks who worry about election security, counties have to conduct post-election audits after every election before we certify final results. So, for the members of the press, tremendous storylines that we're going to have on election day and election night, but they have to exercise a little patience as well and help us with the general public in letting them know what to expect in the days and the weeks after the election. I can already see a certain who is going to take that time period and spread conspiracy theories and false accusations of rigging elections or whatnot. The process is transparent. We welcome observers. It's all for good reason, but we'll get it done in due time, in time for the Electoral College, certainly in plenty of time for the inaugural in January for whoever the victor is. But it's more important to get it right than get it fast.
So is it possible that the networks will realize that, like in the contested 2000 election with Bush and Gore, you can sell more ad time keeping the suspense going for 2 weeks than getting it all wrapped up on election night? We can always hope, but we certainly don't want people saying it's all over on election night and then everything else looks like somebody's trying to take a result away or something like that.
There you go. I think you just recommended a new approach. It's Maybe instead of speaking to the political reporters, we should be speaking to the account executives, the sales
Yeah.
department,
Yes.
for educating.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I just saw yesterday, I forget which reporter it was, who tweeted out a new frame for how to think of election day. It's not really election day anymore, the day when people go and vote. It is, in this day and age, the last day of voting, because voting will start 29 days prior to the election. In California, you can start showing up, if you're that motivated, Rafe, in person to the county elections office and vote early. Or you can vote by mail, or again, you can visit one of the early voting sites. Election day is not the only day, it is just the last day you'll be able to cast your ballot. So we've got to start thinking of it that way. It's several weeks leading up to election day, and then several weeks on the back end to finish counting the ballots and certifying results.
Well, Alex, as we wrap things up a little bit, we're getting a lot of comments online, and some of them are, what can I do? People are really thankful for your leadership on voting rights and on the census. And I think you really have done a great job for California and for the people of California, but for the country too. You're recognized by the other secretaries and have a real voice in this. And I guess people are asking, what can I do? I'm a professor, a teacher, I'm a young person. I'm somebody who's active, but not in public office like yourself. But I want to ask it a different way for a call to action, Alex, which is first, what do you expect from yourself going forward? I know you have very high standards for what you do in government. What's your own call to action between now and election day and beyond for the rest of 2020? And what's your challenge to us for what you think we can do to really safeguard our democracy going forward this year? So yourself first and then us.
So myself first. I think it should be evident by now, Rafe, you've seen me for many, many years. I love public service. It's the same values that I spoke about earlier that I was raised with, that my brother and my sister were raised with. Try to do well, learn, and help others as best you can. And so not just thinking about public service as public service, but being very well aware that I got a chance to serve as a member of the city council in Los Angeles, as a state legislator, and now Secretary of State, because of public trust, right? The people who filled in the bubble or checked the box next to my name when they voted at every election put trust in me that I would do the best that I could in this capacity. When I was first running for Secretary of State, even some of my closest friends and supporters said, really, Secretary of State? That's not a very glamorous job. But look at what the elections world by itself has been under for the last 5-6 years. It's a critical, timely responsibility that I don't take lightly. So yes, each and every day I wake up thinking, what else do we need to do? What else do we need to do to keep the elections accessible, safe, and secure, as I mentioned earlier, and to do my part in the census and everything else. So we're going to continue to be vigilant, continue to stay active, but we're going to continue to ask people for help in getting all this done.
And what do you think we should do? What's your rollout? What you think we can do as residents, whether or not citizens, but as people in California, inhabitants of California, what should we be thinking about? What's our part?
So I'm going to answer 2 parts, short term and long term. Like short term, I think it's going to be pretty easy to predict. If you need to register to vote, or you need to update your registration, or spread the word for anybody that may not be registered to vote yet. And then when the time comes, make sure we're all voting, casting our ballots. Multiple options, no excuses. We make it easy in California. Mm-hmm. But one step beyond that is going to be how you might be able to help us. There's not a county in the state, and there's not a state in the nation that's not feeling the pressure on 2 fronts. Number one, polling locations. Right? No more voting in residential garages or retirement homes for obvious reasons during COVID. And so if you have any suggestions, ideas, or even have a facility that may lend itself to being a voting location, let us know, or we'll connect you with the county registrar of voters, because they're in dire need of additional smarter locations for voting this November. And we can have all the voting locations we could ask for. They're meaningless unless we also have the volunteers to staff them.
Mhm.
So think of all the seniors and retirees that have helped in prior elections that are not going to be available this November. So if you or anybody you know might be interested, willing, and able to work as a poll worker, we need your help as well. So let us know, or let the county know directly. We'll sign you up, get you through the training, help us preserve the resiliency of our democracy this November. And before Trump cuts the deadline even shorter, make sure you get that census done if you haven't already. But the other thing I wanted to mention is more longer term, and inspired by the prior session you had last month with
Mhm.
Antonia Hernandez and Dr. Ross and Fed Ali at their respective foundations. Every once in a while we get a chance to exhale from election talk, because registration is important. The election is critical, but election day will come and go. There'll be another one in 2 years and another one in 4 years. I don't think the strength of our democracy is only measured in how many people registered and voted on election day. The true measure of our democracy is what happens between elections, how we stay engaged as citizens, how we stay engaged as community makers, chiming in with our elected representatives and either offering ideas or holding them accountable, right? When was the last time you wrote to your member of Congress? When was the last time some of us maybe showed up at City Hall for a council meeting or at the school board to advocate for our child's education, or frankly, just reached out, to your neighbors on your block? So tremendous opportunities and need for us to be engaged in our community, including but not limited to engaging with government. And it's crystal clear. I know you've seen the data. Communities that are more organized and active, whether it's through neighborhood watches or neighborhood councils or anything else, life is a little bit better there by all metrics. Areas that aren't as organized or active, that's where other societal challenges tend to emanate a little bit more. So just encourage citizenship, activism, and participation across the board.
Last question, Alex. Many people are exhausted emotionally from everything of
Yes.
the last 4 years, and I don't just mean the epidemic, and all of us. How do you recommend people, a feature of democracy is not being exhausted, is having energy. How do you keep from, with all the incoming overload of challenges that come to us, how do you keep your head together so that you can be positive and helpful and effective without becoming discouraged?
Yeah. No, there's a lot of ways. I mean, thinking as to the oath I took, when I was sworn into this office and every office along the way, there's the challenges that we're working against. There's faith, and whether it's prayer or meditation or whatever your preference might be, that goes a long way. But I'll tell you, the biggest motivator for me is seeing my children every day, and knowing that someday we're going to be handing this off to the next generation. Some in the next generation are already seizing that mantle of leadership. You saw the protests, the marches, the demonstrations over the last couple of months after the killing of George Floyd. So I think it's a question we should ask ourselves each and every day. All right, we inherited the earth, the society, or the governing structures in the shape that we found them. It's, I think, our obligation to leave it at least a little bit better for those who come behind us. And each and every day is an opportunity to make a difference in that direction. And now it's our choice, either do the work or not. I choose to do it.
Well, Alex, not only do I want to thank you for spending time with us today, but to thank you on behalf of everybody who's online, who's been making comments like this. And many have even more questions, and we'll save the chat information so that if some of the questions we might ask you, to be able to tell people the answers to the questions. But thank you for what you do every day, keeping your head up no matter what incoming there is and moving forward. And I'm proud to have known you since you were a young guy coming to the LA City Council at, 26 years old, with all the old folks that were inhabiting City Hall. Would you
We're
just
going to get to those
share,
old time City Hall stories.
when you first met Council President John Ferraro, how did he greet you when you came to the City Council at 26?
That's amazing to think. It's more than 20 years ago when I was first elected to the council. They didn't know any better when I ran for office. Didn't listen to the wait your turn advice I got in some quarters. I announced my campaign, went door to door every day for 9 months, and the people of the Northeast Valley took a chance on me. But when I got to the council, literally with I think I was the first of the new crop of council members serving alongside Joel Wax and John Ferraro and Nate Holden and Hal Burnson, who recently passed. But I think the point you're asking me to make here is, as much as some of them looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, you're my kid's age, my son's age, or even my grandkid's age," John Ferraro looked at me dead in the eye and said, "Alex, I've been on the city council longer than you've been alive." And just put a few things in perspective, but it actually, believe it or not, was not a condescending note that he struck. It was very good to me, learned a lot from him, but I think he realized sort of that generational shift that was about to take place, and it was the beginning of passing the baton.
It's a great place for us to end because so many young people, the baton is being passed to them just as it was to you. I want to thank you, Alex. I want to thank PBI's staff, our producer, Belen Vargas, President Covino, Dr. Gomez, and Alex, your staff, which was wonderfully helpful to us. Roberto and Lourdes and others really made sure you had all the information. And thank you for getting into the spirit of our coffee shop/bar. And look forward to speaking to you again. I want to thank our sponsors and supporters and everybody who participated today. The recording will be available at a later date, and we'll make sure that people get to see it. Thank you all once again, and stay safe and well.